So, Robert, thank you so much for joining us to chat about your brand new book and your first fiction book, The Whistleblower. To start with, can you tell me where the idea for this book came from?
There are sort of two ways of answering that. One was, I'm in lockdown. It's like a sort of open prison, if you remember it. I think like many people in lockdown, I just thought, you've got to take advantage of the fact that you're sort of slightly trapped and do something a bit different. I had, in my 20s, started to write a thriller. It's sitting in an attic somewhere. I imagine it's absolutely terrible. I haven't really had the courage to go back and look at it. But so it's been on my mind for quite a long time, actually, to write fiction, write a thriller. And then if you're saying, where did the sort of storyline and the sort of setting come from? Well, I remember the late 90s almost as though it was yesterday. It was quite a sort of mad, vibrant time. But more importantly, from the point of view of the book and what I'm trying to do with the book, is obviously the main thing you want to do with a book is entertain, grip, thrill. But the other thing I want to do with this book, and I hope with two other books that I hope will follow from this one, that's the plan, is to tell a story about Britain. Because I do think that the really seismic, important political changes that happened in the course of the 90s as we went from, almost 20 years of Conservative governments to a new Labour government, when we, that transition, it changed an enormous amount for all of us. And obviously my current preoccupation is with the sort of mayhem and madness of the world we inhabit today. But I think a lot of that mayhem and madness was bizarrely, and this is not to in any sense denigrate Tony Blair and New Labour, but I think some of the things they set in train have led directly to where we are today. And I thought, I've written 4 non-fiction books, and those non-fiction books are partly about telling that story, but I thought, actually, now I want to tell that story in a sort of fictional way. Yeah. And so this is the first part. I'll do, if all goes to plan, another one around the time of the financial crisis, and then I'll do a final one broadly where we are today. And so that was a very long way of saying there's a sort of serious point I want to make, which is I hope it'll help us all to sort of understand a bit more about the kind of mad world we're living in today, while also, some would say this is more important, actually being amusing and entertaining.
Yes, which it is. It definitely is. It's got that thrilling element. The character Gil in this book does always want the scoop. He does always want, to know the answer. He wants his byline. But he's on the kind of good side of some of the sexism, some of the kind of...
He tries.
He tries.
This is a pretty sexist era. We should, we're writing about. And actually, one of the things that was quite interesting to me, I'm interested to see how people react to it. I try and shine a light on the sort of casual sexism and indeed the really horrible casual homophobia that was around at the time. And I hope people take it in the spirit which is which it was intended, which is basically to say, that's what the world was like then. It was horrible, but one can't pretend it was otherwise, as it were. And as you say, I think Gil tries very hard to be on the right side of these arguments.
And there's also, in the 90s, and without giving, too much away, lots of rich, posh, white men who ultimately triumph. Is that something that has also changed, or in terms of the government and the media as well, or are we still very much there?
So we're definitely in an era of transition. Look around the place. In terms of people who are at the very top, they tend to be, not always, they tend certainly to be men. They're not always, the same old white men. There is a bit more diversity, but although there are now more women in positions of significant power. Not enough. I have encountered an enormous number of very powerful people over sort of 35 years, covering politics, business, economics, doing investigations. One of the things that's striking is how many people you come across in positions of power who are amoral. And in some cases, one is confident they are, what one would call sociopaths. Just not good people. I mean, people who have only one thing on their minds, which is to become as powerful and rich as they possibly can. And those people are still around. And in a sense, one of the things I wanted to do with this book, because you can do this in fiction, is shine a light on how helpful it can be to be a sociopath when you get in order to get to the top. But secondly, to think about when a sociopath is challenged, really threatened, what is it they might actually end up doing of an extreme sort? And that's where the sort of thrilling element, I hope, of the book comes from. And although it is pure fiction, I don't regard the ideas in it as fiction. The idea that, some very powerful people in supposedly respectable positions are fundamentally bad is not, in my view, fiction.
Let's go back to your main character, Gil, in this book. He is... lots of the characters are very developed, but obviously him being the main character, we get the most insight into his psyche and into his brain. When you were crafting him, why did you choose the particular elements that you did in terms of his mental health issues or in terms of just the kind of person he was going to be?
So I guess this is where it gets slightly embarrassing, maybe. I was trying to think how best to get into this. So I had enormous fun writing this book. And one of the reasons I had enormous fun writing this book was because I really enjoyed transporting myself back into that world of the 90s and sort of trying to understand it and recreate certain things. There is obviously research in this book, but I also thought that it would probably help me a bit when writing it to draw on my own experience. And so, truth is, the mental health issues, for example, that I write about are mental health issues that I've struggled with myself. So I now have strategies for controlling my sort of obsessive compulsive disorder. And but there was a time when it was really debilitating, and particularly when I was a teenager, it was appallingly debilitating. I mean, this is sort of obsession with, checking the gas. 3 a.m, I'd sort of get up out of bed as a sort of 13-year-old and check the gas was off, check the back door was locked. When I got anxious, I would have sort of various weird rituals that I would have to do involving with walking in a certain direction, not standing on cracks on the pavement, chanting certain things. And now Gil is somebody who is not at this stage in his life as debilitated as all that. Although he talks about being a teenager in it, but he does still have these rituals that he adopts when he's feeling very stressed and anxious. And that was actually, if I'm honest, that was drawing on something that I have had to contend with over quite a long time. So that bit was about me. The other thing I did with the central character is, his dad is a left-wing academic. His mum and dad are sort of secular, non-religious Jews from North London. That's quite similar to my upbringing. There's a very important difference, though, which will I'm sure, persuade everybody who reads it that this person is a million miles from me, is that Gil is a Spurs supporter and I'm an Arsenal supporter.
You're worlds apart. Worlds apart.
You said it. At the moment, unfortunately, given the start of the season we've had, it's a world apart that causes me quite a lot of pain, actually, but anyway.
Well, thank you so much. It's been such an interesting chat. I also really loved reading the book.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you for having me. It was great talking to you. I'm sorry, I do have this tendency to go on and on and on, so thank you for indulging me.